Today's guest is Adam Niewood, a tremendous saxophonist in the jazz world, also a composer, drummer, and master craftsman. Adam's storied career spans over 30 years, including playing in Dave Liebman's Elvin Jones Live at the Lighthouse Band and a long tenure with the great Pat Martino, appearing on Pat's final album, Formidable. Beyond his musical accomplishments, Adam is a highly sought after craftsman, handcrafting saxophone mouthpieces for jazz legends like Michael Brecker, Chris Potter, and Mark Turner. With a rich musical lineage, his father, Jerry Niewood, was a renowned jazz artist. Adam's journey reflects both innovation and tradition, so join us as we explore his incredible artistry, craftsmanship, and contributions to the jazz community. So, Adam, good to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Good afternoon. Cheers.
Cheers. So kind of walk me through what's been going on with you towards the end of 2024. We got this new year coming up, and any exciting things that you're looking forward to in the new year?
Yeah, well, you're basically interviewing me in my new place. I just moved November 1st. Spent 12 years out in the Poconos and northeastern Pennsylvania, and November 1st I decided to move back home, kind of very close to where I grew up in Essex County, New Jersey. So yeah, kind of freshly back.
Full circle.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So, Adam, the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was that you really had a unique opportunity in terms of playing with Pat Martino. He played in this instrumentation, which was the quintet, guitar, organ, drums, saxophone, trumpet. And it was, we knew Pat Martino in the last years as playing either organ trio or organ quartet with the saxophonist. So you got to participate in this legendary recording, Formidable, one of my favorites, and also got to play with him. I was at a concert you played with him at the Jazz Standard. Any particular memories you have about recording or performing with Pat you that are special to you? Because Pat was a legend and left his mark on the music.
I mean, that's that's hard to answer because each time spending time with him was like profound. You know what I mean? He was pretty deep. You
That's
know?
what everyone says.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and as you got to know him, like very funny too. I mean, he could be equal parts like locker room, like in the backstage in the green room, with the band. You know what I mean? He was one of the fellas, but he was also like very he could float back and forth from talking about like metaphysics and very heady stuff, and then did you guys go get the sandwiches? Like he talking about what we got for lunch. Oh, did you get the steaks? Oh, good. Oh, yeah. So yeah, just I'm trying to think about like the first time I heard him, like live, like in the room. That was kind of like it hit me
You mean
as
going
far
to
as
see him at a concert or being like in a like a
no, like showing
small
up
room?
to the there was a place that we rehearsed,
Okay.
which close to Philly. It was on the Jersey side of the border. It was a huge converted barn, and a friend of his had a place with drums and amplifiers and stuff, and he would just allow us to rehearse there. So we had the first rehearsal there, and when he like plugged his setup and his rig together and he started to play, and I watched his like hands like a tarantula, just like crawling across the fingerboard. You know what I mean? And he
Definitely.
made everything just look so easy, but also like the energy that he harnessed and moved around with the sound was really like striking. And to hear it on recording, I did my homework showing up to the first rehearsal, and I had listened to all the music and stuff, and then hearing it in the room, that especially the first time, it just struck me. I was like, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a guitarist, so I mean, put it this way: I had emailed back and forth with him before,
yeah,
um, and I had gone to see him play so many times, but I could never like go up to him in person and just start speaking because put him on such a pedestal, and I think he deserves to be there. But I mean, it's a true privilege that you got to play with it. I'm sure it's something that you're gonna cherish with you for the rest of your musical journey.
I mean, nobody can take it away from us.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, Alex, myself, Carmen, Pat, Bianchi, those moments, and the trio spent more time together. You know,
Right. Yeah.
so there's something special between those three guys. I think it was kind of for Pat and Carm, it was like you could tell that they were like his boys, like his children in a way. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Definitely. You
I
know,
remember the first Christmas actually. Pat sent out like this really. It was silly. It was like a Christmas card, and it had Pat Pat's head on an elf, and then all of our heads on elves,
oh,
and
that's
it
so
like
funny.
danced around, and it was like so, and yeah, but it was just the funny that he thought on Christmas to send everybody in the band like this Christmas card. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
So
little things like that that are really nice.
yeah, it was cool. Yeah, it was cool. So the experience on the whole was it was very heavy. I mean, I got to play on the stage at Carnegie Hall with that band. So like my first time playing Carnegie Hall was that band. It was again like that was a lot of firsts through that
D-
experience. So
Definitely. And you've had the opportunity to play with so many great players, um, record, play so many wonderful venues as a leader and a sideman. When we talk about gratefulness, do anything stand out for you as far as opportunities over the last couple decades that you really, I mean, aside from Pat, obviously, but anything else that you hold near and dear to you?
well, when asked like if I had time to prepare, like if you asked me that question and I had like a couple weeks to think about it, I could probably put down some bullet points, right?
Yeah.
But I guess, and I don't mean to make light of any, it's an interesting thing. I try to take every opportunity to play really seriously, you know. So yeah, there are standout moments in the last like decade. I would say like playing with Liebman and Nussbaum and Perla and playing that music from live at the Lighthouse, the Elvin Jones recording. There's a lot of moments that come to mind of just like the fans, the people who had the record, and they had a T-shirt or something that Elvin had given them, in the '70s, and then they brought it to the gig and stuff, and then they were like energized about nostalgia. If you think about it, nostalgia is really big, not just in music, but across like film, you know what I mean? Parents enjoying things that they enjoyed when they were children with their children. Nostalgia is huge. So I think like getting to revisit something that was like a huge splash in 1972, 1973 in, after 2010 and seeing the impact that it made on the people when it was brand new and fresh and how they're still talking about it now all these years later, right? And then just being a part of that experience, watching people reminisce.
Yeah, let me ask you, I'm sure you knew all those solos, like you could probably sing parts of them and stuff, if not all of them. When you go to play like a song that's on that record, is it almost like you have to consciously tell yourself, I need to block out what, Steve Grossman played or something to channel what you want to play during the solo? Or I would imagine it's kind of
Well,
hard not to think about those things when you're going to perform that music and go in fresh.
that's a good question. Um, and I think depending on who you ask, the answer that you're going to get is going to be a bit different. At this stage now, there's been a lot of different guys who've been kind of passed the torch and allowed the opportunity to play that music. You know, um, so there's a young guy named Ryan Devlin who's playing now, and for me, when I listen to it, I'm like, wow. It sounds to me like so much like Steve Grossman. It's uncanny, and he really harnesses that like energy, right? So that would be an interesting question to ask like him as far as his approach. My personal approach to the music and to that band when I did it, and I did play with that those three guys, you know, Liebman and Nussbaum and Perla for about 6 years. So, and we went to Europe and South America and all over the United States. Got to play that music a lot. So for me, like the last thing that I wanted to do was like trace over. You know what I mean? I'm gonna give you an example. Like when I was a kid, I was really into comic books. So I would take like tracing paper and I would place it over the comic book, and then with pencil, I would kind of like learn how to create those images via the tracing paper. And then eventually, if you do it enough times, then you don't need the tracing paper. Then all of a sudden, I could just draw Wolverine or a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle or something like that, right? And I think that like the developing of the neural pathways in the mind, whether you're using a pen or or manipulating an instrument or learning new shapes, you know what I mean? Or working at the workbench with files and sandpaper and cutting discs and stuff. To do something in repetition, then all of a sudden it becomes like it's not even that you're borrowing or tracing anymore. Now all of a sudden it's part of like, you know, you just do it, right? So where I'm going with this is that like the last thing that I wanted to do when playing the music was to play a lick or play something that was so Steve Grossman for the people in the audience because they had heard that on the record. Do you know what I mean? So
That's a great answer. I always thought, you know, like I'll give you, I know what you're talking about because like the first thing that came to mind when you're like I saw Pat Martino play an organ quartet with Jeff Tain Watts on the drums, so it was like kind of curious how Jeff Tain Watts would approach playing with that band. You don't want to hear them try to like play like one of his old drummers or something, but really just be themselves and not repeat in a sense. So I think I know what you're talking about a little bit.
well, yeah, and it's not that I think I'm better than. Obviously, how could you be? I mean, you know, Grossman was like apex. You know what I mean? He was really the top of the peak of the highest peak. You know, and especially at that time. Um, but it's almost a respect for that. I'm not going to try to sound like part and parcel just like him because that's him. That's his licks. It's like, yo, man, I'll give you another example, and it was funny. Like this is like I went to go see Gene Bertoncini and Michael Moore play duo, bass and guitar. And at one point, when they were improvising, they both kind of got on the same pitch, and they looked at each other and they said, "Hey, man, get off my note," to each other, right? You know, but it was funny. And then the audience, of course, laughed, and then they both went off, you know, and they started playing, you know, counterpuntally to one another, right? But I don't know. I just, and it's not to say that the other people who, there are people out there now that sound so close to their idols. It is almost like, it's kind of like the other side of the coin of exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I don't mimic exactly out of respect. And I think almost the people that like have learned to mimic so seamlessly, how could you argue that it isn't respect?
I have my own, yeah, I mean, I have my own
Both
personal
are
thoughts
respect.
about.
The guys that sound so much like Steve Grossman, obviously they respect him, and me not wanting to mimic him is also my form of respect for it.
Got
So
it.
neither, who's to say which one is right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have my own personal feelings about, I've talked about it at length on other, you know, podcasts about your own voice and that sort of thing. And it is a lot of, it's very relevant in what we see today with younger musicians, you know, sounding like almost like a clone of somebody else or something like that. But it is a long road to try to find your voice.
I'll give you another example, and this one is through the mouthpiece crafting, I met a young guy named Ben Solomon in
Yeah, I know
Chicago.
Ben, not personally, but I know his
And I
playing.
had no idea what he sounded like. So I did the mouthpiece work first. And he's kind of non-assuming and just very friendly. And I had no idea what to expect. And to prepare a mouthpiece takes a long time, right? So finally, at the end of it, I'm like, all right, why don't you give it a try? And he like just sets it up and puts it together, and then and starts to play. And I was like, it was like the Maxell tape commercial, like from the side, where like, I was just like the Coltrane came over me, and I was like, what, because I had never got to hear Coltrane live in the room. And selfishly, that was like the closest thing probably that I would ever get to hearing. It was so close. It was so like uncanny how close it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Obviously, he loves Coltrane. So it's like, and think of all the people who've been trying for years to do it unsuccessfully.
Yeah, he's one of few, I will say
It's
that.
really hard. It's really hard to sound like that. And he like, and now I hear him now, and he's branched, off into. He doesn't sound exactly like that. I hear other influences, and I also hear like the his own composition has taken him in a different direction now, where it really is Ben Solomon at this point. But back in 2016, he sounded like Coltrane. you know, so but it was done so respectfully. It wasn't just the superficial, like some people when they mimic, they only kind of like grab the lowest hanging fruit of like what is the like almost like putting on a costume for Halloween.
Sure. I mean, and but
Ben,
let me
ben Solomon, like an actor, like became
when
Coltrane.
yeah, but when did you start to feel like you were finding your voice? Was there a particular performance that happened, or did you make a conscious decision like I need to, you know, write my own ideas down? Like, can you talk a little bit about yourself and the journey of finding your own voice? When did you feel like you started to find it?
I think I'm still looking for it.
That's a good
I,
answer.
yeah, I'm still on the. So, what happens when I play is that I close my eyes and I listen to what is coming from the band, and then I can't help it, but like what the music is reminds me of recordings that I've listened to previously. I can't help but if it's like, for instance, with Pat Martino, with Alex Norris, I couldn't help but think of the Unity with Woody Shaw, Joe Henderson, ba 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 do, ba 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 I just I couldn't help but think of that. So like a lot of times I found myself like at certain times like drawing from that well of like listening to the Unity record, right? And then there's other times where like if the instrumentation has guitar and piano together, then there's certain records where I mean Pat Metheny and Pat Metheny is a great example of playing with piano, right? I can think of all sorts of different great bands, the Michael Brecker records where there was piano and guitar, and they didn't like get all in each other's space. They played together beautifully, right? So if the instrumentation has guitar and piano together, then I think of like certain records, like or the Kurt Rosenwinkel records with and Scott Kinsey together, where they just play so beautifully together. Or there's a Chris Cheek record, Fine, with Kurt Rosenwinkel and Meldau together from years ago on that Spanish label. But so I guess I can't help but when I'm playing with the cats, it's like almost like I hear where their influence is. It's like, oh, that reminds me of that record, or that reminds me of this. And I can't help myself. But then I kind of like, in an effort to be cooperative and go with the flow, I emulate the sound of things that I remember,
Sure. Hmm.
right? To try to not be like the puzzle piece of like the sound that doesn't mesh. I'm not going to do that.
No,
I'm not going to
I get it.
But it's like I just try to cooperatively create a sound that I remember in my database of like listening to all these records over the years. I emulate that. So every time I'm playing, it's weird that like what I'm doing is basically drawing from past listening memories of records that I love and emulating that. And then the funny thing is that what comes out on the other end might not be what I'm trying to replicate,
Yeah.
right?
If you, yeah, I
But
mean, let's let's
that,
let's
but
let's think
that
about if you were.
that
Oh, sorry.
transparent no, that transparently is the process,
Got it.
right? It's like I'm replicating things that I really love.
So you've thought about this before, like this is how I'm like,
It's not the first time that a jazz musician gets asked this question. If you think about like traveling around and you sit at a college clinic at Humber College or at uh, you travel to a city, you're playing at night, and then you meet with the students during the daytime, and these questions come up, right? So it's like I've had time, and then you get asked the question, you leave, and then 8 hours later, like you're like, oh, if I had only thought of verbalizing the answer this way, right?
And I'm
So
sure it's still changing though, too. You're still evolving, as you said, and you're still finding it.
yeah. So who are my favorite saxophone players? You're like, well, how did I find my own sound? Well, I don't, I wouldn't claim that I have my own sound. Maybe other people would be like, oh, that sounds like Niewood at this point, right? But the players that I grew up really liking, in the house first growing up, I heard my dad playing, and I liked the way my dad played the saxophone, right? So like that was a pretty big influence at first, right? And then he had a great record collection. So in that record collection, I vividly remember gravitating towards this one record. It was probably red in the beginning, but it had faded pink, and it was called Rock and Roll. Red Prysock, who was Arthur Prysock's brother.
Hmm.
So Arthur Prysock, the vocalist, and then Red Prysock is the tenor saxophone player. So this is like jump, like rhythm and blues, like actually what rock and roll, the beginnings of rock and roll. But Red Prysock, Rock and Roll, that was a record that really kind of like, I don't know, it ignited something in me where I wanted to like play the saxophone, but play the saxophone and drive the band with that swinging intensity. Have you heard this guy before, Red Prysock?
I'm gonna have to go investigate after
Yeah.
we get off this interview because I'm
Now here's
always.
the thing: the album cover has a picture of like a chubby white dude playing the saxophone, and no. So it comes from a time of racism where they thought that they'd probably sell more records if they put a white guy on the cover. But Arthur and Red Prysock are Black Americans, right? So that I that's a whole sidebar conversation in itself, right? That like that comes from a time. So this was actually like this record that I gravitated to. I later found out was the first actual LP that my dad ever purchased.
That's
He's like,
amazing.
that's funny. He's like, that's the first record that I bought actually with my own money. You know,
You remember it affecting you so strongly that the light switch went off or something.
it's like, oh man, if they talk about like now I'm going off on a side another like DNA, how certain experiences are like so profound that they're like in your DNA. Now that like the new catch, generational trauma and stuff like that, or like where they talk about like healing, not just your own trauma, but like past generational things that you weren't even alive for. But certain experiences, I think, are like so deeply in your DNA that like pop was affected by it, right? And then somehow just I was allowed to like flip through the records. There was like a huge bookshelf, multiple bookshelf, filled wide with, and I would go like and just flip and pull them out and look at the cover. You know, if it looked interesting, I would put it on. If not, I would, and there was like easily between 1,200 and 2,000, vinyl upstairs. and then all the classical records were downstairs. So there was a bunch. Anyway, yeah. So I would just flip through them as something to do as a kid. I mean, album covers look cool. The artwork is pretty interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's go off into something a little bit funner question.
Sure.
If the saxophone could talk to you, how would it describe your relationship with it?
um, that's funny. At this stage of my life, I think the saxophone would be like, take me out of the case more. You play me. Yeah, I find myself doing other things that I need to do, maybe more than I want to do.
Is
Yeah,
that just getting older though, or is that just that's life stuff, you know?
just life like anybody. That's why when kids are in school and the people like practice now, it's because that they know that later when you have all these other responsibilities, you'll want to have that time. But other things, you know, to be a contributing member of society and a mature adult, you have to get certain things done, right? So you can't just spend 12 hours in the practice room every day. That's stuff you can do when you're 19.
Definitely. No, I mean it's
That's my saxophone would probably bark at me that I should spend a little more time with it, and I would have to agree. I wish I had more time to just shed all the time. But man, I don't know the sax like.
this is why I call it the rabbit hole sessions because you have
Oh,
to.
it's cool. It's a good question. Honestly, man, the saxophone has never let me down. And
Yeah,
I haven't been asked that question, but now that I'm thinking about it, my relationship with the saxophone itself is clean. You know what I mean? I really feel when I take it out and I start to play it, and when I get into it, like I love it. It's a good friend. The saxophone is like that good buddy that you're always excited to see them,
yeah.
and the relationship is good. There's no bad like I feel very good about the saxophone. But I've been playing it for a really long time, and also I think I grew up in an environment where music and time spent with the instrument was a sacred thing. If mom was practicing the piano or the clarinet, you didn't pester mom at that moment for something. You let her be. And if dad was preparing and he had the door shut and he like had music on and he had music out on the music stand and he was listening to recordings and preparing, like I knew that wasn't a good time to ask him for like money for a new bicycle.
Money. I knew you were gonna say ask him for money.
Yeah, yeah. Like, hey, Dad, can I have like 20 bucks for a new tire? Like, I'd get up in the room, I'd see the music out, the music on. I'd be like, nah, he's in that space. So I think that it is sacred. It's like my meditation. You know?
Yeah, well, I can put it this way. I'm going away for 10 days and I just bought like a synth guitar and you could like cut it and like take the neck, like it goes in half so it'll fit in my suitcase because
Oh,
like it's like I need to meditate, you know? I need
yeah,
to and that's an investment I'm willing to make. I mean, like 4 days is fine, but like 10 days, I'm like I'm gonna want to play. So I get it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. If it was 4 days, maybe I would just go sans instrument. But
exactly.
more than a week.
Adam, I want to before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah, man. I'm not on a. Honestly, I blocked off like you ask me any questions you want while you have me, and then if you want to edit, the feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I do keep the episode shorter, but you can always come do it again and like, whenever you want to. I always tell the people who are guests that they're always welcome to come back and talk about stuff. But,
Sure.
you've been at this life for a long time, 3 decades, as I had mentioned when I did the introduction. Um, there's a lot of mystery out there about this life for younger musicians in school. I mean, what is a misconception that people have about being a jazz musician that you wish more people understood? Maybe they think it's this, but it's not. Anything you feel strongly about?
Well, to be honest, like I think that what being a jazz musician is really going to be personal for like my answer of what being a jazz musician is, like to think that like the way that I have it framed in my mind is the correct way, and then if you don't jive with that, you're wrong. Let me change your mind. This is how you think about it. I don't. Yeah, I think that again, that's going to be one of those things where if you ask each musician what the answer is, it's going to be different. Um, do you mean like for younger people who are thinking about choosing the life?
Yeah, I think that you could look at it that way.
Or like let me add like specifically how are like I want to make sure how are you framing the question?
I'm framing the question is if let's I wish a lot of people who looked in or younger musicians understood that the money is just not what you think it is sometimes. You know? Like I
Okay, so yeah, yeah, I want to make sure because it's like yeah, it's kind of a broad. So economically speaking, all right.
well, it could be economically, or it could be like, oh, you go to travel and like, I mean, like I travel, but like the traveling sucks. That's the worst part about it, you know? I
Traveling has become hard. Yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same.
wish
So
they understood the amount of failure that you have on you know what I mean? Like, and all the things that go wrong, like, and the stresses of going to a gig, and like they see the finished product, especially now on social media. And I'm kind of like giving you some ideas that I think about.
yeah, all right. I'll give an example. There was a time like back in the time before smartphones when everybody just had like basically like the indestructible Nokia
Yeah,
phone.
flip phones. Yeah.
Yeah, like where each number on the thing stood for three letters, so texting was a nightmare. So like at that era, I took a band, the Rabble Rousers, which was like my road band. All guys, my age. So at this time, I think it was Greg Ritchie on drums, or possibly Devin Gray on drums. Uh, Rohan Kamani played tabla, and Chris Higgins on bass, and I mean, buddies, man. These are good friends, and the fact that we're still friends after this, like, the touring was hard at that time because we were just trying to like nobody knew who I was. I hadn't played with anybody of note, so I was trying to get my foot in the door. So we went to go play at this place in Toronto, and part of the deal was that we were going to have hotel rooms so that after driving from New York City to Toronto and playing a gig, we would have a place to go to sleep. Seems reasonable, right? So it was part of the agreement. And then at the end of the evening, of course, the owner like had dipped out, and the wait staff and stuff like didn't know where he was. I'm not going to say the venue, and I don't think we.
I probably know I think I know what it is because I know a place that people went to play and they put like five people in one room or something like that.
Well, this was like there was a hockey convention in Toronto. Hockey's huge, and there were no hotel rooms anywhere. Like, good luck. So basically, at the end of the gig, at least we got paid. We got paid the minimum in the cash. There was no bonus or like percentage of the bar. We got paid the minimum in Canadian money, and then afterwards, we ended up having to go to the Rex. And luckily, the folks at the Rex were cool, and they rented, and I paid for the rooms, as the leader. So that's just one example of like sometimes being a musician and a young musician and trying to forge your path, and you have to be ready so that the sidemen get paid, and that if something goes wrong, like for instance, they promise you nice hotel rooms, or just not even nice hotel rooms, but a hotel room, you know. And then at the end of the night, the club owner just like ditches, and like actually there were no hotel rooms ever, and now you're like 9 hours from home, and you need to sleep somewhere. You have to be prepared for like a contingency plan, and I think that's something that young folks who play in jazz band in high school and went to some all-state competitions, and like they like the competition factor. They like the I auditioned and I got in and I got to go to this thing for the weekend and hang with these people. I think I'm going to do this as a lifestyle, you
Yeah,
know.
no, I get it. Adam, this has been great. Let me plug your social media for you. I know it's just your name, Adam at Adam Niewood on Instagram. I'm looking at it, and also your website, Niewood.com, just your last name, right?
Niewood.
I before E.
I before E. Yeah, not like pie.